Hey everyone, this is Todd, the Cybertruck truck guy, and today I'm going to explain why I think Elon is so excited about the Cybertruck suspension. Word of warning, this is going to be a little bit of a long video because I think the Cybertruck suspension is maybe the most underrated part of the truck. And I'm going to be using a lot of legit source material to make my point, not a bunch of random speculation. But pulling all that information together actually requires a little time. So that said, I'll be putting time place marks in the notes. So if you want, you can jump around any sections that don't interest you. So last Friday, February 22nd, Elon tweeted the following, quote, "Active ride height and active dampening are game-changing for a truck or any car with a high max-min weight ratio," end quote. So this is an unsolicited tweet that made me think about a bunch of thoughts I had about the suspension and feeling like the rest of the world doesn't get it. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to put those thoughts into a video using actual information available based on what we actually know about the Cybertruck. So here's the thing, if you're a truck person, you probably have a love-hate relationship with your suspension. What makes it good for some things makes it bad for others. And since truck people are in their trucks most of the time, we get a lot of practical lessons on the strengths and weaknesses of our suspensions. So most people who live out there in truck land are familiar with a phrase that says, "It rides like a truck." Now, this can mean a lot of things to different people, but usually it means the following. So it means it's got a hard suspension, that when it's unloaded, it transfers a lot of the road feel right up into the seat and into the steering wheel. Number two, it means it has a large degree of body roll when cornering at speed. That's the sensation where you kind of feel forced over when you go around a curve or a corner. And it has a solid rear axle that transfers the road angle right up into the frame. So a lot of times you kind of feel like you're leaning to one side or the other, especially if you're on an aggressively graded road. So in other words, riding like a truck means a suspension system that isn't very good at preventing the physical forces of driving from being felt by those in the vehicle. Now, of course, if you want a truck that rides like a car or one that drives like a Jeep, you have other issues, other trade-offs. And therein lies the great dilemma. With suspension, you've always had to choose between a lot of carrying capacity, a lot of off-road functionality, or a comfortable and capable road vehicle. Well, that is until now. So over the course of this video, I'm going to explain why this suspension is so unique, and I'm going to do it without a lot of conjecture. I'm going to use information provided either directly from Tesla or from journalists who actually got up close to the Cybertruck. And then I'm going to line out 3 specific situations where I think the Cybertruck suspension will totally transform the driver experience. So let's dive into what some privileged journalists had to say about the Cybertruck suspension. For whatever reason, the staff at Motor Trend magazine got invited to the Cybertruck party ahead of all of us. Not only did they get a chance to see and photograph the truck long before the rest of us, they got a chance to get up close and personal with the Cybertruck on at least 2 different occasions. Now, as you can imagine, as veteran auto journalists, they went more than skin deep. They used every opportunity to look over and under the Cybertruck with as much detail as Tesla would allow them. It's precisely that access and those first-hand accounts that we're going to spend a little time with as we revisit everything they had to say about the suspension. Not only do they reference the physical characteristics of the system, but also how it felt when it was actually in action. In total, I think their comments provide maybe the best intel available on why Elon is so excited about the Cybertruck suspension. Okay, so in their first article, Tesla Cybertruck revealed, they had this to say, quote, Based on Elon's experiences growing up with 4x4s in South Africa, great pains were made to keep the Cybertruck's belly flat, its motors and suspension tucked up and away from the pickup's armored underbelly to improve its off-road performance. Although most off-roaders and pickup owners would sneer at an air suspension, Tesla opted for a significantly beefed-up version of the Model X's air setup, with upper and lower A-arms at all four corners. Now, air suspensions typically offer lots of ground clearance, but little meaningful travel. But based on nothing more than watching the Cybertruck get lowered from its lift to the ground, that shouldn't be an issue with this truck. The amount of travel was, frankly, insane, hinting that Tesla might be targeting the Ford Raptor's desert-running credentials. Now, in their article called "Can the Cybertruck Go Off-Roading?" here's what they said, quote, "Although we don't know all the details and capabilities of the four-corner air suspension, we do know it has massive amounts of tire travel, possibly as much as 14 inches from full droop to full compression, with up to 6 inches of air ride adjustability from full kneel to full 4x4 extension. So depending on how well the engine and traction control software is tuned, this could be more impressive than anything we've seen in a long time," from Motor Trend. From their article titled, "What Will the Pickup Truck World Think of Tesla Cybertruck?" They should have asked me. Anyway, they said, "Another possible sticking point for some traditional truck buyers could be the four-corner air suspension, a stronger version of the system based on the Model X. Typically, more aligned with car-like passenger-only ride and handling dynamics and capabilities. As of today, the vast majority of full-size pickups and SUVs are suspended with either steel leaf or coil springs, usually set up for carrying heavier loads, whereas air suspensions are more aligned with smoother and lighter requirements. Of course, this issue could be minimized by the fact that many big rig Class 8 over-the-road haulers use primary or supplemental air ride setups, as well as some global heavy-duty military troop carriers. In fact, putting the Cybertruck on a lift could impress many truck buyers who will see the long travel droop of the massive four-wheel independent A-arms the air suspension allows, and also the beefy substructure surrounding the front and rear electric motors. Lastly, here's what Motor Trend said in an article titled, "The Tesla Cybertruck Squats Like a Rally Truck," and it's their first ride article. "Compared to the ride height and ground clearance of the Mustang Mach-E, this might as well be the Gravedigger. With the compliance from the tire sidewall and the Cybertruck's softly sprung air suspension, I barely noticed the speed bumps we rolled over." Speaking of softly sprung, it's the Cybertruck's body motion, more so than the accelerative force, that stands out. All of Tesla's previous cars are immensely quick and instantly torquey off the line, but nothing the automaker builds feels like this truck does under full throttle. The stainless steel brute squats back on its rear haunches, pointing its nose to the sky. As soon as the driver lifted his right foot, the front end dove down toward the ground ahead. I didn't get the impression that it had poor body control, but that it would lean, dive, squat, and take a set around a corner like a rally truck headed straight for the Baja 1000. Okay, that's their quotes. I think those quotes actually give us a lot of data to work with, so let's summarize it here. Number one, the Cybertruck will be the first pickup truck to come with four-wheel independent suspension. In all the excitement about the air suspension, nobody is talking about how revolutionary a rear independent suspension will be on a truck that can carry 3,500 pounds and have a ground clearance of 16 inches. Number two, the air suspension on the Cybertruck is truly revolutionary. While other trucks offer air suspension options, none of them compare with the features of the Cybertruck suspension because it covers both ride quality and extremely long suspension travel without compromising its load handling chops. For instance, the Cybertruck suspension appears to have about 6 inches of movement in the air cylinder, and it gives the tires up to 14 inches of total travel distance. For comparison, the Dodge 1500 optional 4-corner air suspension offers about 4 inches of air cylinder movement. To get to 14 inches of suspension travel on a truck, you have to get an aftermarket suspension for your truck. It's not stock, maybe the Raptor. 3. Not only does the suspension provide for more comfort over rough terrain, it also changes the way the truck feels as it accelerates in corners, making it behave more like a racing truck or a rally racer. 4. It is a much beefier version than the air suspension in the Model X. They didn't just rework the Model X system, they totally redesigned the system specifically to work for truck applications and purposes. 5. In most cases, truck and off-road enthusiasts shun air suspension because either their limited cargo capacity or limited travel range. However, these issues have been addressed in semi-trucks and some military vehicles, so solving them for vehicles is really just a matter of cost and engineering, and Tesla's done it. 6. Apparently, Musk did a fair bit of off-road traveling when he was a youngster living in South Africa, and the lessons he learned there are being applied to the Cybertruck. Every step of the design has been made to optimize it for its off-road capacity without compromising its load carrying or ride quality. To Elon, this is personal. Okay, before I start talking about some of the specific cases where I think the suspension is going to be revolutionary, I want to spend a little more time explaining why a rear independent suspension on a pickup truck is such a big deal. Because I think the air suspension has kind of overshadowed that feature. So first, as I mentioned earlier, this is the first pickup truck to have a rear independent suspension. So, okay, Honda Ridgeline, but it's a Honda Ridgeline. So like I said, it's the first truck to have independent rear suspension. And that begs the question, why? Well, it turns out that once again, we have that issue of trade-offs. So I think a couple of quotes from some industry experts will help explain it better than I could. So I'm just going to take their words. So Car and Driver had this to say about the subject. Quote, "A live solid axle is a simple and durable design. They have been used for decades as a workhorse for payload and towing. But these big capabilities come with a few downsides. A live axle uses its axle housings to assist in locating the wheels. This gives the axle great strength, and it's its biggest downside because when one wheel moves, so does the other. Independent rear suspensions, don't suffer from this ride and dynamic limitation, and they also have some packaging benefits. On the other hand, typically independent rear suspensions have lower payload and towing capabilities than an all things equal live axle, though there's exceptions, like the Cybertruck. The auto blogger GM Authority expands a little bit on this when he's explaining why GM and other pickup truck manufacturers are actually thinking about switching their trucks to independent rear suspensions. Quote, "Typically an independent rear suspension configuration comes with a long list of benefits, including improved ride quality, improved handling and control, and for enthusiasts, the potential for greater wheel articulation off-road. However, there are disadvantages as well, including greater weight, higher maintenance, and higher cost, and a lower payload and towing capacity. That said, the trade-off is likely worth it for a majority of buyers, including GM truck buyers." End quote. So what they are saying is that if you could somehow keep the strength, power, and lower cost of a solid axle, rear axle, but combine that with the ride quality, handling, and off-road wheel articulation of an independent rear suspension, you would have the unicorn of truck suspensions. Now, are you starting to understand why Elon is so freaking excited about the Cybertruck suspension? Based on all the available evidence, the Cybertruck will have a suspension system that is as close to perfect as possible. It will handle better than any other pickup. It will have more wheel travel than any other pickup. It will be more comfortable than any other pickup. The Cybertruck suspension isn't evolutionary, it really is revolutionary. Okay, so let's talk about 3 specific situations where the Cybertruck is going to totally transform the user experience. I'm going to start with the mundane, and then I'm going to ramp it up to the semi-ludicrous. Okay. Number 1, long trips and commutes. Look, I'm a truck guy. My wife is a truck gal. We've been driving trucks for the better part of the last 10 years. And the one thing I can say with absolute confidence is trucks kind of suck on long trips. They just are not good compared to a nicely appointed SUV or car. Now, obviously, some are better than others. And the best was probably my wife's last truck, the F-150 Lariat, but it still drove like a truck. Look, trucks sit up higher off the ground. They get pushed around easily when it's windy. Trucks have more body roll in the corners. You know, you feel the road more. You feel the potholes. You feel the speed bumps. That's the way trucks are, but not the Cybertruck. The active air suspension will actually lower the vehicle on the highway. It's going to dramatically reduce body roll and sway. It will absorb the irregularities of the road. You can basically set it how you like. You can float, you can skim, or you can fly. It'll behave however you command it. And it's going to give you just the right amount of feedback that you're looking for on your trip. Number 2, rock gully and washout crawling, slow technical off-roading. Look, the reason I traded in my Ford F-250 and purchased a Toyota Tacoma TRD off-road is that my need for a work truck was ending and my desire for a play truck had arrived. The kids have either moved out or have their own cars, and the company has plenty of trucks to do the work that's needed, so it was time for me to have some fun. But in the world of off-roading, what you have to realize is that usually buying the vehicle is just the first step, because no truck right off the lot, except maybe the Raptor, is going to come with a truly wicked off-road suspension. Even the most well-equipped models usually get reworked by their owner as they get more and more into off-roading. And the first decision you have to make is, do you want a billy goat or a cheetah? You see, all off-roading isn't the same. One kind is steep and rocky. It has obstacle-strewn trails. For that world, you're looking for a suspension that gives you 2 things: a lot of clearance and a lot of wheel articulation. You want a suspension that can carry you over the nastiest obstacles. But unfortunately, those obstacles don't come at your tires at the same time. So you want the ability of every tire to be able to move on its own, articulate freely without being limited by what the other tires are doing. Well, it turns out that one of the best setups would be to give you a rig with high ground clearance, a high lift kit, and 4-wheel independent suspension. In fact, if you look at a purpose-built rock crawler, that's how they're made. The only problem is when you want to drive more than 50 miles an hour, you're going to find out that your billy goat is going to turn into a walrus for the road. Your steering is vague. It feels like you're ready to tip over every time you take a curve at any speed. If you get hit by a sideways gust of wind, it's going to give you a sense, you're going to be white knuckling your whole way home, which you're going to be driving at 60 miles an hour. That's the trade-off with these really good off-road suspensions. Unless you have the Cybertruck. Cybertruck has clearance of 16 inches, better than anyone else, better than the Raptor. Wheel articulation, the Cybertruck is the first production truck that has a suspension that's equivalent to getting an aftermarket off-road suspension. Basically, it's a purpose-built transformer. When you hit the trails, a few pushes of a button, and your long-distance stallion is going to turn into a billy goat. You drive it for the weekend in billy goat mode, and then when it's time to go home, back to a stallion. You get home relaxed and exhilarated with a bunch of selfies of you and your odd space truck scaling terrifying trails. Okay, scenario number 3 is rally racing or Baja racing. To go fast off-road is not for the faint of heart or for the faint of wallet. If you're content to stay on well-maintained dirt and gravel roads, you can get a decent rally car for around $100,000. If you want to go racing across the desert, then a purpose-built trophy truck can run you $250,000 or more, a lot more. Now, one reason the price tag is so high is the exotic suspension kits that those vehicles require. Now, of course, most of us aren't planning on competing in those events, and the Cybertruck won't. But just getting a feel for them is actually fun when you're going off-road. The problem is that each type of vehicle has a different set of specifications. A rally car is really a racing car with enough clearance to absorb some jumps in rough terrain. It's low and fast and nimble. On the other hand, a desert racing trophy truck has to deal with huge jumps, massive sandbogs, and long series of whoops, which is really a nice way of saying 3 feet tall speed bumps that are spaced so close together that you start hitting one before you left the other. Oh, and you got to do it driving 100 miles an hour. Either way, you're not looking for a billy goat anymore. Now what you want is a cheetah. Explosive, nimble, lightning quick when changing directions. You want to avoid obstacles when you can and fly over them when you can. If the billy goat mode of the Cybertruck is about clearance and wheel articulation, then the cheetah mode is about wheel travel and dampening. You see, the first place to use adaptive air suspension wasn't on the trails, it was actually on the racetrack. The reason for this is not to make the ride softer and higher, it's actually to make it stiffer and lower. People who like to race their road cars have long been using air suspension to give them the capability to lower their vehicles on the racetrack and to make their suspension stiffer and more responsive when they're traveling at high speeds or they're throwing it into high G-force corners and turns. On Baja Racing trophy trucks, they need a suspension that will allow the tire to travel freely across violently bumpy surfaces, but also allow the driver to feel connected the whole time the tires are flailing all about. This is achieved by giving the tires a massive amount of travel distance and then by adjusting the dampening of the suspension. Dampening is a term used to explain how the suspension behaves when it is compressed at different speeds and at different positions in the wheel travel. Active dampening means that it adjusts its behavior automatically to reach a specific goal for the driver. In other words, if you want a stiffer ride with more connection to the road and less body roll, then it will adjust suspension to do that. On the other hand, if you want a softer, more compliant ride, it'll adjust it to do that. This means that when racing through the desert, the Cybertruck will allow the tires the freedom to glide over rough terrain while simultaneously giving you a sense of being in touch with the surface and being in control of the truck. So that's it. The Cybertruck suspension will give you the option to seamlessly switch from a mule to a stallion to a cheetah to a billy goat and back again at the push of a button. And it's going to come standard with any model you buy. I mean, that kind of boggles the mind. The most advanced vehicle suspension ever created for a production vehicle is going to come standard in even the entry-level model of the Cybertruck. And for some reason, nobody except Elon seems very excited about it. I guess at some point, we just can't keep absorbing all the awesomeness of the Cybertruck. Like ogres and onions, the awesomeness of the Cybertruck has to be absorbed in layers. Okay, thanks for watching. Remember, when you like and subscribe and comment, it not only encourages the YouTube robot brain to recommend my videos to others, but it also makes me feel a little less weird about projecting my questionable opinions into the void. Thanks.